Hello all and welcome back. Today we are going to draw Spawn by Todd McFarlane. And the reason why I bring him up first is because I know a lot more about Todd McFarlane than I do about Spawn. Spawn's first appearance, I guess, would technically be in Spawn #1 because that's the full story he's in and everything. And if you heard my rant from the Hulk 180, 181, then that's pretty much it. He has some earlier appearances, but they're not really appearances. They're more like ads. There's a Malibu Sun issue where he is featured on the back cover and the front cover, or is it the front cover? One of the covers. And no, I think it's both, because on the back cover, he's colored wrong on some issues, and that one's worth a lot more than the one that's covered regularly. So some people call that Spawn's first appearance, but it's really just an ad, because Image Comics were originally distributed by Malibu Comics, so everything went through Malibu and it had the Image eye on it, and it was Image Comics just distributed by Malibu Comics. This picture was actually going to be Batman, and I was all set to draw Batman, just standing on a roof looking all cool and Batman-like, and then I was thinking that I got a request for Spawn, and I don't see many videos of people drawing Spawn, so that could be a good or a bad thing. I don't know which, but I'm going to go with it, and I am going to draw Spawn. I'm also drawing Spawn by memory, which is always fun, but I did forget one thing. Part of his costume is red, and I did the whole thing as gray, but I think it's better that way anyway, because there's so much red in the cape. In fact, the hardest part about drawing Spawn is drawing that cape, especially since I decided that since we're doing Spawn, we got to go all Todd McFarlane in it and put lots of lines and hatchwork in it and give it that visual interest, not just flowing fabric, but the lines for the shading and whatnot to really make it pop. So that's what we did here, and you'll see. It takes a little while to get the inking done on this one, so the video is a bit longer than the last one. I think it's twice as long as the last one, and that's just because we had to do all the inking and the hatchwork on the cape. And when you'll see once I get through the penciling here that most of the cape is kind of made up as we go along too, because I add a lot to it and I just make a mess, so I just kind of pick it all out with the inks while I'm going. So we end up with a really cool, really flowy, really Spawn looking cape, and I'm really happy with how that came out. As you can see, the base pencils go really quickly because, you know, he's just a standing figure. There's not much to him. There's not much dynamics to it. It's all from the cape and the big block of red that makes the cape. If it was going to be Batman, I was going to put a little bit of a city behind him. But with Spawn, I end up putting so much cape on it. Trust me, there's a lot more than what you see here. That's nothing compared to what we end up with. And so there wasn't really any room to throw in a city, so we just did a ledge and we did a moon, and we got a pretty badass drawing of Spawn, I think. For all you who wanted this to be a Batman drawing, I do apologize, but he's coming. I started working on Batman this week, and I actually did like 3 sketches, and I didn't like the first 2. One of them I actually finished the pencils on, but it was just like a leg up shot, and he was just standing there looking, hey, I'm Batman. There's really nothing to it, nothing dynamic, and I'll probably finish it and put it up eventually as maybe a quick short or something. Well, a shorter drawing, I'll just keep going fast and let it run through and do a brief Batman on it, because I could talk about Batman for days. But I ended up with one that I really like, an upshot, Batman looking all angry, fist pumped. So that one will be coming in the next few weeks. But right now, let's get back to Spawn. Another fun part about drawing Spawn are these chains. He has chains everywhere. He has them on his belt. He has them on his neck. And, well, that's pretty much all there is. But there's a lot of them. And if you ever drew a chain, it's not hard. It's just time-consuming. I just draw a line to give me the shape of the chain, kind of like if I was drawing Spider-Man's webs. And then I just build the chain around that shape, and you get the chain. And it looks pretty cool. And same thing up on his collar here. Now, Spawn is a childhood creation of Todd McFarlane, and he's shown the pictures that he drew when he was younger to prove it. And they're not his best work because he was developing as an artist. But once he got to Spawn, he was at his best. He just came off of Spider-Man, and he was going for the throat. He wanted to prove that his name and the name of Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld and Walt Portacio and Mark Silvestri and all those who ran off to start Image Comics with him, even though I believe it was Rob Liefeld's idea first, and then they all kind of jumped along with him. He wanted to show that they could make comics just as good and sell just as many copies as Marvel or DC, and they more than proved that they can do it. In fact, as far as indie comics go, Image is still around today, and they're publishing more books than they ever did. So Todd was right, and Spawn is still being published today, and so is Savage Dragon. I think those are the only two continuous comics from the original creators just to keep going. Eric Larson, I'm pretty sure he's still banging out Savage Dragon. I'm going to have to Google that later and find out for sure, but it went on for a long time, and it's gone through more than one dragon too. But Spawn, he's pretty much just been Al Simonson. And there's a couple other Spawns. There's Hell Spawn, there's Medieval Spawn, there's Gunslinger Spawn. I think at one time Spawn became an angel. He became a king of hell. Spawn has a lot of history, and these are just things I'm going off that I've read in little articles here and there, so I'm sure there's plenty that I'm missing. I remember the first 10 issues of Spawn. Was it 10? Well, he started out with his own little story arc, and it was basically Al Simons died. He was a mercenary, and he was a black man, and he goes to hell, and he makes a deal with the devil to come back as his hell spawn because he wants to see his wife, his family. His daughter was just born. He misses them, and he wants his life back. So you got to be careful what you wish for when you make a deal with the devil, because he does get sent back as Spawn, and he looks like he did when he died. He's burnt, he's ugly, he's terrible, but he's in the Spawn costume because the Spawn costume, I forgot what it is. It's some kind of symbiote kind of thing that gives him his power, and it's limited power. He can be Superman, but it won't last long, and then he'll die because when he runs out of power, he dies. So the other thing that happens is, like I said, make a deal with the devil. The monkey's paw thing is when people see him, when he turns himself to human form, he doesn't look like he did. He looks like a white guy, a blonde-haired white guy. And as you can see, the pencils went really quick. But that's a big but. The inks take forever because I did the loose pencils without all the detail because the figure was pretty simple and the cape idea was pretty simple. And that's about all that stayed simple because I got crazy on this one. If you watch any of my other videos, you see that I like to keep things nice and simple, and I like big blocky shapes, and I put things together more towards shape than textures and line work. Well, on this cape, we went into the line work, and we went hard. So if you were waiting to see how some hatching goes and how to do heavy line work, and you want to see how I pull it off, you're watching the right video, because this is the one it happens in. Because like you saw, the pencils went quick. Inks, not so much. So yeah, when Spawn starts off, he comes back and he wants to see his wife, and he goes and he's a blonde-haired white guy, so she doesn't recognize him, and he can't tell her who he is because whatever he says, it comes out wrong, and it's magically changed, so he can't just say, hey, I'm your husband, Al Simmons, I'm back from the dead, sorry, I look completely different. So it doesn't work that way. And part of the first arc, he ends up being like a savior to the streets, kind of like a Batman, but he lives on the streets. He's with the homeless guys, chilling. And with this one, like I've said before, I usually like to start with the head because that's usually the most complicated thing, and then the rest just goes super quick. On this one, I decided to get the chains out of the way because they are the least fun thing of anything to do on here, at least with the cape and the textures. It's fun. You're getting in there and you're deciding where you got to do the line work and where the ripple is and which part of the cape this is and how it folds over. And basically, as far as I look at it, Spawn is the cape. Without the cape, Spawn's kind of meh. Even when you do the Gunslinger Spawn, he has like a trench coat on and you got the flowy trench coat, but nothing beats the big red cape of Spawn. In fact, there we go, drawing his head because I got those darn chains out of the way. And so I remember when the Spawn came out, he did a bunch of issues where he got creators to do one-off stories for him. He got Frank Miller to do one. I believe he got Alan Moore. No, not Alan Moore. It was Neil Gaiman. He got Neil Gaiman to do one, and he got who the hell did it? Okay, so I had to Google who the hell did it, and it was Dave Sim. He created Cerebus, and Cerebus, up until Spawn overtook it a few years ago, was the longest-running indie comic ever. It hit 300 issues, I think, and so McFarlane was getting close, and he definitely made it his mission to make sure he made 300 issues, but Spawn's still going. It's well past that now, so he got that. But the story that Dave Sim did was the one that stuck in my head mostly, because it's basically Spawn as creator-owned. He's kind of underground with Cerebus the Aardvark, and he's kind of giving him a history of comics almost, and how all the characters are sort of held as prisoners. None of them are free. None of them belong to their creators. They're all locked behind the wall of corporate America, and they're all bastardizations of what they used to be. And there's one double-page spread in general. It's a cage, basically, and all the heroes are in it, and all you see is their arms hanging out of it, and he's talking about, the one who came first, and that one's Superman, and other ones like the Hulk and everything. And you can see all the hands: Batman, Shazam, Spider-Man, the Hulk, everybody, and they're just in there while he's telling the story about how these characters are stolen from their creators, and that how they got to be better than this. And then it cuts to a scene of Superman in heavy shadow, and I forgot exactly what he says, but he's the one who came first, because Superman is the first traditional superhero to come out and started the whole superhero craze, and it was nice that they gave him credit for that. And I don't remember exactly how that story ends, but it's kind of funny because that story is a big thing on creators' rights and ownership of your characters, and how it's the way it should be done, and how everything Image stands for is going in that direction. Because, if you do a comic for Image, you keep your rights and you pay them whatever you got to pay for the distribution and everything, but it's your characters, and it's your money, and it's your copyright, and it's your IP, and you get to keep all that. But it's also funny because one of the other issues, I believe it's issue 9, I remember that one because that's the first appearance of Angela, and that one was written by Neil Gaiman. So Neil Gaiman created Angela. She was a warrior from heaven who came down to an angel, who came down to stop Spawn, to kill Spawn, because he's from hell, he's an abomination, and she's an angel, and he needs to go. And after that whole arc, McFarlane kept Angela. He decided that she was his, because it was published in Spawn, and he used her all the time. But the problem was the contracts they signed and everything. She belonged to Neil Gaiman. And eventually they went to court, and there was a long drawn-out court battle, and Neil Gaiman ended up winning the rights to Angela, and I'm guessing he was really mad at Todd, because instead of offering it to Todd and selling it to Todd, he sold her to Marvel Comics, and I think part of that deal was so that they could get the rights to Miracle Man, so he could finish his Miracle Man run. So that was another fun little side tangent on McFarlane. And the funny thing about Miracle Man is, if you know anything about Miracle Man, he was like a British Superman. And Alan Moore started it off. Well, he was an older character, but Alan Moore sort of made him more of a Superman in the real world and what would happen. And it was violent, and when he got into fights with people, cities got destroyed. And the main villain ended up being Kid Miracle Man, which is kind of a play on the Marvel Boy and all those Shazam family, like Miss Mary Marvel and Marvel Boy, and there's a Marvel dog and all that stuff. And he became evil, and then when Alan Moore left the run, Neil Gaiman took over. But he never got to finish his story because the publisher, I think it was Eclipse Comics, they stopped publishing or whatever. Or there's a problem with the rights to Miracle Man, which became a big problem. Nobody knew who owned the rights to Miracle Man. It was owned by like 4 or 5 different companies. And at one time, McFarlane bought the rights from one of them, and he thought he owned everything, and he was going to go forward with Miracle Man, and he redesigned them, and it was actually pretty cool. But it turns out he didn't own everything, and it ended up being not his to use. I think he used the character once, called him the Man of Miracles, but it wasn't actually Miracle Man, but it was his new design. And I think part of Neil Gaiman's thing to sell Angela to Marvel was Marvel finally bought up all the pieces to Miracle Man and put them together. And it allowed Neil Gaiman to finish his story. We won't talk too much about Neil Gaiman because he's got some court stuff going on now that I don't know what's going on with, and we'll wait till that's finished to do anything from him because Sandman was cool. And you can see I did some of the cape, and that's not even the hard part. It gets really when we get into the flowing parts of it because I just get a little crazy. And he has all these spikes all over him and all these straps because, it was the 90s when he came out. And another fun Spawn thing about the 90s was I used to have a drawing buddy. His name is Mr. Sif. We're going to actually do a little podcasting soon. He has another channel that's completely different from mine. He plays video games, and he's ridiculous, and he's definitely not on the PC side, but he's fun, and I've known him forever, and he wants to teach me about the internet, so that's a thing that might happen. But the reason I bring him up is because when we were kids, he was my drawing buddy. We would sit around, usually at my house, because I had the giant drawing table, and we would sit around, and we would draw all day. We would make characters up. His imagination was definitely far more vivid than mine. He's more of a writer than I am. In fact, naturally, I would say he's more of a natural artist than I am. Everything that I do, I learned to do by doing a lot of it and going to school and taking classes. He's more of a natural talent, and his style is definitely more indie and more cool. Mine's more of a mainstream kind of thing, but I do think I have some indie influences that I throw in that shine through because I don't think I fit the Marvel style very well. At least not well enough for them to ever hire me. I've dropped off plenty of portfolios, but I do know why they never hired me. But yeah, so me and Sif, Mr. Sif, we would sit around and we would draw all day long, and we would watch videos, and we would soak up everything comic book. We would read comics. We would draw comics. We had a bunch of videos. Well, not a bunch. We had like 4 or 5 videos that I picked up at the comic shop, and they were an interview series and a how to draw series on comics that came out in the 90s, and they were videotapes. They were hosted by Stan Lee. I believe there were 2 at McFarlane. One was just McFarlane, and I remember him telling a story. It had Spawn on the cover, and his story was he can make anything look cool. And his example was, I could draw a picture of Thor picking his nose, and it's going to be cool. And he basically described how he would draw Thor standing there all cool with his cape flowing in the background and his hair flowing and, stuff going on in the background and the line work and the textures and the colors. And he'd be picking his nose. And he's like, you wouldn't even notice he was picking his nose. It would just be a really cool drawing of Thor. And I think Todd pretty much brought that into everything. Says no matter what he was drawing, he went out of his way to turn it into a pinup and make it look cool. And that's kind of what made McFarlane stand out back then, because everything was a pinup. In fact, I had a poster that he drew of one of the mutant turtles. I think it was Michelangelo jumping off and just coming at you looking all badass because McFarlane drew it. And that's the only time I've seen McFarlane draw turtles, and I always wondered where the rest of the turtles were. But apparently that's the only poster he did. He just did Mike. He didn't do any other ones. So I didn't get a Leonardo or a Donatello because Donatello is my favorite turtle. So that kind of sucks. So yeah, we would watch these videos, and another one was with him and Rob Liefeld. And they're just talking about, they're starting their new comic thing, and they're all excited, and they're talking about how they create characters. So Stan says, why don't you show me how you would design a character? So they had like a big pad up there, and they both started drawing on this pad, and they started drawing a character, and they just kept adding things to it. They kept adding armor and pouches and chains and mechanical things and like a targeting thing on the eye and huge 90s shoulder spiky pad things. And Stan's just watching, and he's laughing to himself. He's like, I don't know about you guys, but I think there's a little too much going on here. And if I was to put this character out, I would draw it back a little and, mellow it out. And the reason I remember that is because that guy eventually showed up in Spawn, the guy they created on that videotape, which I guess nowadays would be a podcast if they still did that stuff. But back then you had to buy it on a videotape because streaming wasn't a thing. And it was Overkill. I think they called him Overkill in the video. And They changed it to Overt Kill, I believe, in the Spawn series, but he was in the first year that I read too. And my other favorite Spawn villain was Cygor. He was a big gorilla with all these cybernetic implants, and I don't know anything about him. He just looked cool. I have a thing for gorillas. Gorillas are a badass animal. Even before this whole 100 gorilla challenge in Harambe, I had a couple, I had a Godzilla thing that McFarlane Toys did, and the Cygors, a few different Cygor figures, and the gorillas were my jam. Another thing McFarlane did was he made action figures cool again. I mean, when I was younger, they had Marvel figures, they had Secret Wars, and they had some other ones. Toy Biz did them, and there were some DC characters, but they weren't really that great. They were just more cartoony. There's no really highly detailed figures. G.I. Joes weren't that detailed. Star Wars figures weren't that detailed. Transformers were sort of detailed, but they were limited because 80s technology and transforming cars, but they were still cool. Voltron was probably the coolest one as far as looking like the cartoon. But McFarlane, after he started Image and got that Spawn money in, he started McFarlane Toys. Now, McFarlane Toys took the whole toy making thing to the next level. The sculpts were awesome. The details were awesome. I used to go to Toys R Us every Thursday, because Thursday is when they got the shipments in. And back then, well, Toys R Us isn't even really a thing now, but back then you could go into Toys R Us and you go to the counter and you'd ask the lady at the service desk, you say, hey, did the new Spawn figures come in? And she would call in the back and say, yeah, they did. And then they would bring the box up to the front, and you could open it and go through it and get the figures you want, and then the rest would go on the shelf. So it's kind of like a hack to get the toys you wanted. Like, my favorite one was the Max. I still have one on a shelf today. And I had a bunch of Spawn toys at the time, but I believe I told the story in my Daredevil video where my friend Phil lent me the money to buy a Daredevil #1, and in return I gave him all my Spawn figures. So I thought that was a pretty good deal. In fact, I'm pretty sure Phil still has all those Spawn figures, because Phil keeps everything. He has it all. He has my friend's USS Flag, the big aircraft carrier from G.I. Joe when he was moving out of his mother's house back in whenever the hell that was. He threw all his stuff away. So he threw this giant aircraft carrier in the garbage, but we had dumpsters because they lived in a condo park where I used to live. But I wasn't living there anymore at that point, so I didn't know this was going on. So he threw his USS Flag away and all his other toys. And Phil saw that because he lived up the street. Phil jumped in that dumpster. He pulled all that stuff out and saved it all. And which is a good thing, because the USS Flag, it's like one of those mythical toys now. I was telling some people at a comic show about it, and like, oh yeah, everybody has a friend who had it. They didn't believe me. I'm like, no, Keith had it. He threw it away. Phil saved it. It still exists. But I don't care if they believe me or not. It's true. In fact, I saw an ad. The USS Flag was like $120 back in 1980, whatever. So it was actually more affordable than I thought, but $100 was a lot of money back then. But Keith had one. So as you can see, this cape has a lot more line work and a lot more hatching and shading than I put into pretty much anything I've drawn in the past. I don't even know how long. Because I felt Spawn deserved it, because Spawn's identity is the giant cape. So I went for it. And then back to McFarlane Toys. Like I said, he made the toys cool again, the sculpts, when I was going to art school. Because I felt I needed it, because working in gas stations for the rest of my life didn't seem like it was something that I wanted to do. Not that there's anything wrong with it. I had a really good time working third shift in many gas stations and having friends come visit, and it was just a good time. Nothing to complain about at all. I would get a lot of drawing done because there would be a good 4-hour period at night, 5-hour period where nothing was going on. People would stop coming in, you clean the store, and I had a sketchbook, and I drew pictures. And then at art school, some of the teachers that went there, they were also sculptors, and they worked for McFarlane Toys, because McFarlane Toys was in New Jersey at the time, and they brought in some of the sculptures for the toys, which was really cool, because they were pretty big. They were probably 12, 18 inches tall, and they were all hand sculpted back then. It's before the whole computer-aided drafting and computer sculpting, where now you could just find an STL file of any character you want and print it out, and you got a pretty cool statue if you know how to paint it. And they brought in those masters. They brought in the Danger Girl ones. They brought in Abby Danger and the Russian girl and the other one, I forgot her name. And those were awesome. And just seeing the full-size sculpts of those were really cool. And then they would take the full-size sculpt, and there was some kind of machine that would sort of trace it and scale it down. And that's how they would make the molds for the toys. And this is coming up again because we were talking about Overkill. And when his toy came out, it was much smaller than all the other toys in the Spawn line. And the reason it was smaller is because when they did that machine thing to scale it down and make the molds, somebody pushed a button wrong and it made the figure too small. So he was way smaller than all the other figures. The problem is that's the most expensive part of the process, so it was just either scrap the toy and throw away the money you spent on making that mold, or you put the toy out. So Todd, he's a business guy, he went out and he put the toy out, and it just looks kind of funny because he's a lot smaller than all the other figures at the time, but that's why. And the cape's pretty much all inked in now, so I'm just working on the ledge he's standing on because you see the cape, there's not really much room to have any buildings in, so we just went with the sky background, my favorite thing to do, the two-tone sky, and I did a moon because, you know, back in the 90s, the moon highlighted everybody, and that's something that stuck with me too. You'll see I put moons in most night shots that I do. And, you know, you got to add your cracks and your texture to the building because if you just draw white blocks and you color them gray, they don't really look like bricks. So I like to add some cracks and everything. All my cityscapes and buildings are falling apart. They're full of cracks and broken stucco and hatch marks and lines. But it gives them character, and you know exactly what you're looking at. You know you're looking at a stone building. And there's the inks. Spawn is done. Well, ink-wise anyway. Because now we got to color this thing. And for this drawing, that fancy new thing that I learned about the color dropper tool fill bucket, where you could use the other layers and it'll fill in everything the color that you want just by clicking on it, will not work for Spawn because Spawn has way too many lines in this cape. It would just fill in the big spots, and I'd have to go in there with a pen anyway and fill it all in. So I had to go back to my traditional way of coloring, which is just tracing around the shape and then filling it in with the bucket after that, with it just taking that layer into account. And it's not the fastest thing in the world, but it could be a lot worse. If I was just coloring this in like I was using a marker or something, it would take a while, and chains and everything, and there's enough inside of Spawn that's not red to pop with the red to make it all work. But yeah, it takes longer to color Spawn too because of the mess of the cape, and I'm not really a professional colorist. I don't really get into the whole making the flats and then taking that and selecting that because I can't afford to pay somebody to do the flats for me, so it's kind of a wasted step for what we're doing here. So if you're looking on how to professionally color a comic, this isn't really the way to do it. So I apologize for that, but it does get you a nice looking pinup when you're done. And we're going to go back to Mr. Sif from Camp Kill Commentary. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. If you want to watch his channel, it's Camp Kill Commentary. He basically smokes a lot of pot, plays video games, and he's a funny guy. So if you're looking for a little hilarity and something just to relax and laugh to, I would highly recommend going to his channel. He's a good guy, he's funny, and he's ridiculous, and he's a good friend. So give him a check out if you want. I know I don't really have a bunch of followers, and he has a heck of a lot more than me, but the reason I bring him up again is because I figured I'd tell a fun little Mr. Sif story. When we were out of high school, he shows up at my house one day, and he has a bag of quarters. I won't talk about where the quarters came from, but he had a bag of quarters, and he says, "Hey, can you borrow the car today?" Because I didn't have my own car. I had to use my father's car. I said, "Probably. I don't think anybody's going anywhere today. Why? What's up?" He's like, "They released this new game that I want to play. It's called Magic the Gathering." And so is the alpha set of Magic the Gathering. It just came out. Because we played Dungeons and Dragons. In fact, the campaign that we started back when we were kids is still going on. He's still building off that mythology, and he's going to build that into his channel too. And I'm going to try to find the time to get in on it and play it, because one of the characters that I played in the original campaign is still going, and he's still causing trouble for everybody else because he asked us what we wanted the characters to do when we were done with the game, and I made the mistake of saying he wants to be the most famous man to ever live. And with the imagination Mr. Sif has, he took that and ran with it. And, well, once we get into that and he starts posting that stuff on his page, I'll bring it up in other videos so you can check it out. And so we went down to and he's like, so if you take me down to this comic book store in New Haven that just got the cards in, I'll buy you a box. So I said, yeah, whatever. So I said, Dad, can I borrow the car? And he let me use the car. And I took Mr. Sif down to the comic book store. I can't remember the name of it. It's not there anymore. There's a lot of comic shops like within a mile of each other back when we were younger. It was the thing. And he bought me a box of Magic cards. You know, I believe we got packs. We didn't get boosters. It was like the single packs. And he bought a bunch for himself. I tried to play the game a few times, and I was not very good at it, and it wasn't really my jam. So another friend of mine, her brother wanted to play. So I gave him my cards. So I gave away a box full of Magic the Gathering alphas to a friend of mine's brother because I didn't know they'd be worth anything many years later. So oops on me. Pretty sure I didn't have a White Lotus or anything, but I don't remember what was in that box. Could have been something good. Her brother could have him in a box somewhere and retired for all I know. So if you did, good on you, buddy. You're welcome. And the other cool thing about Mr. Sif back in the day was, like I said earlier, we would draw all the time. We were drawing buddies. And the problem with getting old and getting responsibilities and getting jobs and getting girlfriends and wives and cars and kids is you kind of don't have that anymore. You don't have a drawing buddy or a partner to sit around with all day and draw ridiculous comic pictures and inhale toxic markers and just have a good old time with it. It's just not a thing that could really happen anymore. So I kind of do this now because maybe a lot of you don't have a drawing buddy or you never had a Mr. Sif to draw with. So nowadays, without, well, I mean, I still know Mr. Sif, but we don't hang out like that. So now most of these drawings I do at night while I'm watching TV or something after, all day babysitting or working or whatever it is I had to do. I unwind by drawing these pictures. And, I draw them to post them online in hopes that, somebody will watch them and learn something from it. And if you don't have a drawing buddy, you can come along with me and you can be my drawing buddy and we'll draw Spawn together. We'll draw Spider-Gwen together, she's coming up. We'll draw Green Lantern and Stitch together, and we'll draw Daredevil, and we'll draw Spider-Man, and hopefully, you have a good time following along and drawing along with me, and if you have any questions, throw them in the comments, and I will be more than happy to answer as many as I could with as good an answer as I give you, but honestly, I don't really have a good answer for most things, except for art-related, but that's what we're here for. We're here to draw together. And as you can see, I got pretty much the red in on the cape, which was the hardest part, because the shading is just going in there with a darker red or a blue and just adding highlights in. So we get on that now. We're going to do the blue of his mask, because usually when I highlight white, I use some form of blue, unless I use a gray, which he has a lot of gray in his costume already, so we don't get into the blue on the gray. We use blue instead of gray. Sorry, not blue on gray. And it all starts to come together. And I even have to highlight the chains. I should have did that first, actually, because, again, that's the least fun part of this drawing. I mean, it's fun because when they're done, they look cool as hell. But, drawing them is a little tedious. And you're going to find sometimes you're drawing things and it's tedious. You're like, oh, when's this going to end? But you know what? Then when you finish it and you look at it and you see the finished drawing, then you're like, yeah, that was worth it. That was worth drawing all these chains and getting all ridiculous. Because like I've said in earlier videos, nothing's going to be perfect. Don't worry about perfect. Just do the best you can and get it done, and the next one is going to be better than the last one. So just don't worry about perfection. Just get your drawing done, be happy with it, and move on to the next one. Because even if you're not completely happy with it, at least it's finished, and you have something to show for all the work you put in, and the next one will be better. Which I believe I said that already, but it's not a bad thing to reiterate. So yeah, see, now we're doing the spikes and the chains, and we're adding in the blue, and we're getting those things all figured out and looking cool. So, because you can't just leave the chain stark white or background color when you're doing this, because then they just stand out too much and they don't fit in with the rest of the drawing because there's no shading on them. Because we're going to get into shading everything, the cape, his legs, all of it. I was actually going to put a green glow around the hands and have that popping up. But when I finished the sketch, I was just like, nah, it doesn't need it. This cape is what makes this cool. And if I put a bright green bubble of smoke and glowing out of his hands, it would take away from the coolness of the cape. So we just stuck with the cape. And you see there's that droop end on the cape that's really big and it's just pointing down, and it was driving me crazy. Well, it didn't drive me crazy. I thought it was cool while I was working on it. And then, I shut the iPad off, and I thought I was finished with this, and I was moving the video over, and I was looking at the still, because I got to save the PSD, I got to save the color, I got to save the inks, and I got to save the pencils, and then I do the mix of all three blending together for the thumbnails, and I was looking at it, and like, I don't like that. So I had all this done, I had all the thumbnails done, and I'm like, nah, I got to change that. So I change it, and I actually recorded it and I tacked it on to the end of the video. So, if you really don't like something, you should fix it, but still, finish the drawing if you're not happy with a part like this one. I wasn't happy with it, but I finished it. And when it's done, I am more than happy with this. This is probably my favorite one of these to draw so far, because it was just fun. And I enjoyed working with this and doing all the extra line work. It doesn't fit all my drawings. Sometimes, like if I did this to some of the other drawings, like a Stitch or the Daredevil or the Spider-Man, it would have just looked out of place. It wouldn't have worked. But for Spawn and doing my best Todd McFarlane impression, it works perfectly. Now, my favorite Spawn issue isn't really an issue of Spawn. It's the crossover with Batman. Todd did one, and he had Frank Miller write it. And then there was another one by, I think Klaus Janson drew it, and that was from DC's end, so that was Batman Spawn, and McFarlane did Spawn Batman. So this is not a Pulitzer Prize winning story or a Hugo Award winner by Mr. Miller at all, but it is fun. You got McFarlane doing Batman with the Batman cape, and if you've ever seen McFarlane's Batman before that, it's all cape in his year 2, and that one cover for Batman 423 with just the black cape on the ledge. It's iconic, and that book is only worth anything because it has that cover on it. It's not a first appearance, it's not a key issue, nothing important happens in it, but it has one of the coolest Batmans drawn by McFarlane that has been done. And that's why people collect that issue. And having him do a whole issue with Batman and Spawn, it's just a battle of the capes. And Spawn saying, I could use a little bit of my power to beat up Batman. There's nothing wrong with that. And at the end, Batman throws a batarang through Spawn's head and splits it open. And that carries into the Spawn comics for I think a year or two after that. Because they don't really mention Batman in the issue after that. But he basically ties his head back together with a shoelace because it's got a gaping wound in it. And for a year or two, when Spawn doesn't have his mask on, which he didn't have his mask on a lot, he just had his burnt up head showing, he would have the shoelace sewn together from getting stabbed in the head with the batarang at the end, because Batman knew that wasn't going to kill him. And that was pretty funny, just seeing him carry that joke on for so long. Now we're just adding the shading into the cape, and even in the cape I do a lot of line work with the reds and the dark red. Instead of just leaving it all solid, I'll do some more hatching, and well, it's not really hatching, it's just more thick thin lines, more of a Silver Age kind of thing, how they used to go around the muscles and everything with the lines. I mean, there's hatching, but it's mostly just lines indicating shadow, and that's pretty much where I'm putting most of the dark red, so that the cape looks like it has dimension and flow instead of just being a big block of red over a figure. And that's one of those things that you could do when you're drawing along and you want something to pop out and you want parts of it to flow better. You just throw a darker color over it, darker version of the color for the shading. And I don't know if that made much sense, but That's how I do it, and it's coming along fine. And I even put a little outline on the chains, so it looks like the chains are above the cape to give that a little bit more dimension too. Because these chains, believe it or not, are the tedious part of the whole thing. But like I said, once you're done, you're like, yeah, chains are cool. I should draw more chains. And then you rethink that. I'm like, maybe we'll wait till we draw Lobo to draw more chains, because we will be doing Lobo eventually. Because Lobo is cool. Another fun little Todd McFarlane thing that just popped into my head. No, I didn't look this up. That actually just popped into my head. He has a thing for baseball and hockey. He's a big fan. And I'm not, so I can't really talk about the people I'm about to talk about. But in the early issues of Spawn, there was a mobster. I think his name was Tony Twist. And apparently Tony Twist is also a mobster. Not a mobster. He's a hockey player. He's a mobster in the comic book. And Todd just used his name because he's a big fan. And Tony Twist did not like that he was using his name. So he's like, hey, stop. Cease and desist. Don't use my name for the character mobster, because I'm a good guy. I'm a hockey player. I'm not a bad guy. And McFarlane being McFarlane, he's just like, whatever, I could do this because it's not you. It's a mobster who just happens to have the same name as you. So Tony Twist, or whatever his name is, they sued McFarlane and they won. And Todd had to pay them a crap ton of money. I don't remember how much, but Todd had all his action figure money and his comic money by this time, so I don't think it bankrupted him, but I'm sure it hurt. And he also was buying baseballs back in the 90s. Mark McGuire and Barry Bonds, and I think it was just those two. They were having like a home run thing. They're trying to get the most home runs ever. And they were hitting home runs like they were going out of style, and they were getting close to the record. And Todd was buying all the baseballs. So if one hit the record and was ahead, Todd would buy that baseball, then he'd buy the other one. So he had the Barry Bonds balls and the McGuire balls, and he had quite a collection. But it turns out those guys were doing steroids and juicing, so the records are kind of tainted, and they got little asterisks next to them, or at least they should have asterisks next to them. But Todd bought all those balls, and he spent a lot of money on them. I think he spent $2 million on one baseball back then. And a funny thing is, a graffiti artist, a popular one, I don't remember his name, he had a lot of money. He bought one of the Barry Bonds balls. I don't know if it's the one McFarlane had, but it's the record-breaking ball. So yeah, I guess it would be the one McFarlane had. And he donated it to the Baseball Hall of Fame. But he screen printed an asterisk onto the ball. So if the Hall of Fame wants to display the ball, which I don't know if they are, or if they did, but it has a giant asterisk printed on it because Barry Bonds was doing steroids at the time. He hit the home run, so it shouldn't count towards the record because, steroids weren't legal in baseball, and they still aren't, I don't think. So the record didn't happen. Well, it happened. He broke the record, but he didn't do it naturally. He was using performance-enhancing drugs to get it done. So, yeah, Todd bought all those balls, and it cost him a lot of money. So now we're working on the ledges standing on the giant stone blocks and whatnot, and I just do a basic coloring job on these. I just put in the shadows, and I put in a little more line work. And sometimes when I draw these things, I get in there and I do little swirly, messy patterns, and it makes it look more like stone. But since I started putting paper textures over things, that helps a lot with the texture, so it wasn't really necessary here. And it just makes everything look more like stone and pulls it all together at the end. In fact, I think when I'm done with this voiceover, I'm going to go to True Grit Texture Supply. If you want some fancy brushes to do the Ben-Day dots, which I don't do any on here, or you want to be able to do classic comic coloring with the dots, well, not the dots, with the old printing process look and blend CMYKs together to get your looks, they have some great brushes for that, but they also have a bunch of texture packs for papers and whatnot. And that's what I'm going to look into, because I only have like 4 or 5 of them, and I think I need more, because I can't just use the same ones in every drawing. That gets boring. And now we're filling in the background, the blue sky, just a dark blue sky, which actually works nicely because I could use the fill bucket with just the background layer thing that I couldn't use in the cave, so it fills it in nice and quick. And of course we throw a big moon in, and I Use my favorite little Ben-Day dots to give it the glow. So it looks like there's a little moon glow behind them. And we're doing that now. And I usually do that in Photoshop. I'll actually blur the moon and then I'll turn it into a gradient so there's a natural blur, a gradient coming off of it instead of just what I'm doing here, which is more of drawn texture. And I couldn't do that for a while because I haven't had like a copy of Photoshop that I could use, and I just recently signed up for it, so I could do that now. So that'll be coming up in the next video, and I will probably figure out how to record the screen on the computer to show you how to do all that stuff in Photoshop. Because, I mean, it's not better or worse than this, it's just different, and it's something I haven't done yet, one of these drawings. And here I'm putting in a star background, which is just paint that I splattered on a piece of paper at work one day, and I scanned it in, and you get this. I splattered black ink on white paper, and it gives you the star pattern when you invert it, and you just select the background, pull it off, and you get more or less stars depending on how you condense the selection and whatnot. And it's not very interesting, but if you want stars, it's the easiest way to do it. And here's what I was talking about earlier, where I didn't like the droop of the cape, but it was already done, so it would have been a real pain in the neck to erase everything and start over again and just color this one section. So basically I flattened the figure of Spawn, and I cut the piece I wanted off and put it where I wanted it. But then that left this white spot here, which cut into the background and cut into the moon. So I had to fill all that in separately and put it all together, but I feel the drawing needed it, and it looks better now that I took the time to change it and make it flow more than just drooping in front of his eyes like a sad dog. But with that, Spawn is done. So thank you all for coming along. Hit that like button and the subscribe button and the bell button, because I'm going to keep saying that because I'm supposed to. And I hope you enjoyed this trip down memory lane with Spawn and Todd McFarlane and myself. So have a great week, and I'll see you next time.